Madam President, yesterday I went to Chicago to a residential neighborhood and went into a building and saw a piece of American history and an American humanitarian challenge, the likes of which we've seldom seen. In this building were 70 children. They were children who just hours and days ago were at the border of the United States and Mexico. They had turned themselves in to the border officials, and they were being processed. Our law says that within 72 hours, they need to be moved from the law enforcement world to the world of protection, or at least secure environment. That's the right thing to do. It was a law passed years ago when President Bush was in the White House, signed by him, and I believe unanimously passed by at least one of the chambers. So it was not controversial at the time. It was thoughtful. It basically said, if it's an unaccompanied child at the border, within 72 hours, put them in a safe place. This is one of the safe places across America. It is a shelter in the city of Chicago, and it's not the only one. It is protected from the public. If you went by it in a car, you wouldn't even know that it was a shelter with 70 children inside. In a residential neighborhood where for 19 years the shelter has been welcomed because it's clean, secure, no problems. But now we face a challenge because the number of children unaccompanied coming into the United States is reaching record-breaking proportions. America, primarily because of location and other circumstances, seldom has faced anything like a refugee crisis. Well, we can remember efforts by the Haitians or the Cubans, maybe the Vietnamese, the Hmong people, to come to the United States. But our experience pales in comparison to countries like Jordan. 10% of the population of Jordan today are refugees who've come to that country from all over the Middle East. When Syria collapsed under the weight of war and all of the horrors that it brought, 2.3 million, maybe 3 million, left Syria to countries like Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon. For these countries, refugees are part of their daily lives. For the United States, it is rare. It is rare to see one. It is rare to speak to one. And that's why yesterday's experience for me was so important. Because I'd heard all of these stories about these children and a lot of speculation about why they're here and what we should do with them. And I wanted to see them firsthand. Well, let me tell you, of the 70 children, there were some that were newborns, babies being held by their mothers. Now, I've reached a point where it's hard for me to guess anyone's age, particularly young people. Harder still when they're from countries in Central America because they are smaller in stature, many of them malnourished, and they are usually a little older than you might think. They look younger. But 5 women walked into this dining hall carrying their babies, and I don't believe a single one of them was 15 years old. They had brought these babies, many of them on buses, for 8 days to the border of the United States to try to escape. Cases of rape and assault had led to these pregnancies and these babies, and they were trying to get away from drug gangs and threats on their lives. And here they were in this neighborhood in Chicago, in a safe place with others just like them. And then when you went among the children, 90% of them from Central America, some from Africa, some from China, 90% of them from Central America, and you'd speak to them and hear their stories. For many of them, there was a relative in the United States they were hoping to find so that they could finally find a safe place. This situation is a terrible humanitarian crisis involving vulnerable children. The United States is about to be tested. We're going to be tested as a people, our generation, as to how we respond to this. And I hope that we pass that test. Remember, our country, the United States, issues a report card every year. The State Department issues a human rights report card on the world. The United States stands in judgment of the world and their record on human rights. And we take into consideration the way they treat women, how other countries treat children, how they treat refugees, and we grade them. That's a pretty bold position for us to stand in judgment of other countries, but we do, hoping that we can set a standard that they will follow and that we can hold them to those standards. Now we are going to be graded. The United States will be graded as to how we respond to this crisis. The President has sent a bill to Congress. He's asking for a substantial sum of money so that we can not only deal with this issue at the border, but beyond, in places like the shelter that I visited in Chicago. And there's a lot of speculation among senators and congressmen about how our laws are going to deal with this current flood of children coming into the United States. We know why they're coming. Many are being pushed out of their countries by drug gangs and violence. Girls who are threatened with sexual assault if they don't give in to a gang leader, and then if they do, killed and left in plastic bags by the side of the road. Young boys drafted into these gangs at the point of a gun, they're going to comply or be shot and killed. That's the reality, not to mention the horrible poverty which is endemic to these three countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And so now we have to decide what we will do. There's several things that are obvious. First, I'm glad that President Obama, Vice President Biden have gone down to Central America and told these families, please do not send any more children. It is just too dangerous. And they don't automatically come into the United States and receive citizenship. If you've heard that, it's wrong. We've told these countries, we've begged their leaders to help us in discouraging these children from coming. But in many cases, desperate parents, desperate families are doing desperate things. I asked yesterday at the shelter, is it true that some of the teenage girls who arrive here, and they all go through a physical exam, are on birth control pills? I said, yes. Before they start the journey, their families will give the girls birth control pills as a protection from pregnancy because they fear that they will be assaulted and raped. I cannot imagine a family situation so desperate where they would make that decision, but it's happening. And I look too at some of the comments that have been made. There have been people who've said, you know what we need to do? We need to flood the border of the United States with National Guard troops. It doesn't make sense because these children are not trying to sneak past border guards. They are turning themselves in as soon as they cross the border because they have a little piece of paper with the name of someone in the United States to contact. So more troops and guards on the border won't change those desperate children. One of them I saw from Guatemala with his little sister. She's a cute little thing, but too shy to say anything to me. He, through a translator, said a few words, and he carried her on his shoulders across the Rio Grande River. That is what his responsibility was, and he was going to get across that river with his little sister. He did. And that is why we need to look at this in human terms as well. Before I came to Congress, I used to be a lawyer in central Illinois, small town of Springfield, not a big city. I guess by our state's terms, we're proud of our population, but not a major city. And I practiced law there, and I knew what it was like in a small town to practice law. And I also know this, no one in good conscience with an ethical bone in their body would put a 6-year-old kid in a courtroom and say, good luck. We never did that. It was inconceivable. If there was a child whose fate was going to be decided in a courtroom, there was a guardian ad litem appointed to represent that child's interest, not the interest of any other party, just that child. There may have been an attorney appointed in addition to represent that child, because you realize they cannot make decisions for themselves. Now we're faced with the suggestion by some that when it comes to these children, within a few days after their arrival in the United States, they will be put in a courtroom. If members of the United States Senate and House of Representatives came to that shelter in Chicago and saw those little children sitting at the table, they would be embarrassed by that suggestion. You can't do that. It isn't fair to them, and it doesn't reflect well on our values if it's even suggested. We have to have a process that is fair and one that reflects our values in the United States. This is a human tragedy.